Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for being here. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Je suis très honoré d'être ici, and that's probably as much French as I can do today. My name is Alex Romanowski. I'm the Vice President of Scientific Affairs with AstraZeneca, and it's been my great pleasure to moderate the next session, talking about public and private partnerships. I'm a physician by background, and as a medical doctor, I really sympathized with all the first-line healthcare workers, and the last few years that were definitely probably the most challenging ever. And I think the challenge was here in Quebec, was here in Canada, was around the world. And I think also showcase the gaps that we have in the healthcare systems. And I think gives us actually, I'm trying to find the silver line here, an opportunity to improve the healthcare system and the delivery here in Quebec, but also in Canada. And I will argue around the world. As an organization, AstraZeneca partnered with London School of Economics and World Economic Forum for a program called Partnership for Healthcare System Sustainability and Resilience. Because we all know what happened in the last few years could happen again, and definitely has implications that we're still trying to manage and figure out in today's world. So I'm looking forward to the session today, all the great questions that you're going to ask to the panelists. I'm really looking for interactive session, because the purpose of this is to share knowledge, but to also share challenges and identify opportunities in order for all of us to contribute for a better healthcare system. There is a clear need out there, and I will argue that there's no way we can change things if we don't partner, all of us, academia, patients, physicians, pharmaceutical companies, all together. We could develop solutions that the patients will benefit in the end. I will argue that in Quebec, this probably started a year ago with the health reform, and there's the Bill 15 that was just announced a month ago. So there's definitely Quebec, in my mind, is at the forefront of this change. And I will also argue that the fact that the health records now can be transferred with you as a patient within the province of Quebec, it's also a great step forward. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. And let me introduce the four panelists. And I will start with Darcia Pope, Vice President, Strategy, Innovation, and Planetary Health, Vancouver Coastal Health. Darcia has worked at Vancouver Coastal Health for over 20 years. In her current role, she leads a dynamic and diverse team and successfully identifies strategies to remove barriers and ensure new innovative ideas can be rapidly piloted and implemented into practice. Darcia, welcome. The next panelist that we have today with us is Cornelius Roll. Cornelius is coming from a German company, F-Beta, and he's actually coming from Germany for this presentation, so thank you for traveling all the way today. Cornelius brings his demonstrated expertise in building meaningful private-public partnership actually in Germany, where he has worked with the Federal Ministry of Health in advancing legislation that established a new reimbursement model for digital therapy. So I think it will be very interesting to hear his experience and learn from the German story. Cornelius, welcome.
Thank you.
My next panelist is Michael Cardinal, pharmacist. He's a co-founder and chief operating officer of TherapX. Michael is the leader of the complex digital healthcare implementation strategies within national healthcare systems, such as the implementation of care trajectories in cardiology here in Quebec, involving stakeholders ranging from patients' foundations like the Heart and Stroke Foundation, health IT vendors, and pharma companies such as Novartis. His company also works in public-private partnerships with the International Standardization Organization for the development of global health and wellness app standards, which I believe are extremely important. So I'm looking forward to hear more about that. Michael, welcome. And last but not least, Ron Johnson, Vice President, Eastern Health. Ron has approximately 30 years of progressive career experience in healthcare, from frontline delivery to executive management. He is currently on assignment with the Newfoundland and Labrador Transformation and Planning Office, where he's leading the development of a new provincial healthcare organization. So looking forward to hear all these insights, Ron, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I will start with a series of questions for the panelists, but as I said, I'm really looking forward to hear from you, and I'm looking for an interactive session, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions you might have. But just to set up the stage, I'm going to ask Cornelius first. We all know that for a long time Germany was not maybe at the forefront of innovation and collaboration, but it seems that you are able to change that. And can you tell us how you did it in Germany, and how describe a bit the DIGA fast track system that is now available in Germany? And I'm going to bring the slide up, please, Olivier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. DIGA Fast Track, it's a new reimbursement pathway for digital therapeutics in Germany. And DIGA stands for Digital Care Application, and it's a whole new product or category of products that are now reimbursed by the German healthcare system, or by the statutory healthcare system. Before actually talking or defining a DIGA and talking about the fast track, I'd just like to point out where we came from in Germany. So we had a couple of, for sure, like reimbursement pathways in Germany, but they were mainly focused on either therapeutics or medical devices, and both of them were not really suited to bring digital innovation into the system. Therefore, it was clear we needed a new reimbursement pathway. That's the fast track. And we also needed a new category of products, and that's the DIGA. And a DIGA, digital therapeutics, it's a software solution that has a therapeutic impact on the patient. It serves to manage a disease or the treatment of a disease. And what's the very particularity about it is that the digital main function, so like the equivalent to an active substance in a pharmaceutical, that this creates a healthcare benefit for the patient. So that's the very innovative power of the DIGA. And about the process, and that's also why I brought this slide. If you ever touch the fast track again, you will for sure stumble across this slide. The innovative power of the fast track is that there are multiple ways for manufacturers to enter the system. So if you consider it from a manufacturer's perspective, you are to the very left, and you want to get the DIGA admission, and that's the top right. If you make it into DIGA admission, then you are fully reimbursed for 70 million people in Germany, and that's the absolute goal. Yeah. And top part, so the top reimbursement pathways with the 2 thumbs up, that's the more classical way. That's the one that's very copied from pharmaceutical market access. So you perform an RCT, the RCT shows effects, you argue to the institution why you comply with the criteria. However, then there is the second pathway, and that's the preliminary admission, and that allows manufacturers to not show comprehensive evidence, but show a plausible justification. So that's how it's written in law. And you can access with a small pilot study into the system. You will get reimbursed for 12 months for the very product. You have almost free price setting. So 12 months free price setting, you are already reimbursed. And during this trial period, you need to perform the bigger RCT, the proper RCT. And at the end of the 12 months, if you have enough evidence to get into permanent listing, you will do so. And otherwise, you'll unfortunately end up in the bottom right corner, and that's a rejection. Yeah.
What's the percentage of therapeutics or solutions that end up in a positive in 12 months, and versus the other path, I guess?
That's another similarity to pharmaceuticals. Evidence is the only currency that counts. So I think there have been like 200 DIGA applications until yesterday, and 50 made it into the directory, and approximately 150 didn't make it into the directory. However, if you look into the statistics, they weren't rejected, they withdraw the application. So, but that's it, like a quarter.
Thank you so much, Cornelius. Appreciate the insights. Michael, I have a tough question for you because honestly, when we talk about private companies, and I'm coming from one as well, there's always the conversation of us serving our own interests and not necessarily be the broader patient interest. So how can healthcare system actually successfully manage the risk around the use of digital health technologies coming from the private sectors, which is even tougher, I guess?
I like that you said that it's a tough question because, I could write an essay of 50 pages on that. We have 3 hours there. So essentially, because it was a complex question, I had to rely on my friend there, ChatGPT, to try and make an answer. So, I wrote all my thoughts and I said, hey, can you describe me like what is the common things and thematics that are resumed by my thought process? And ChatGPT has told me that successful management of risks around the use of digital technologies from the private sector requires careful planning, strong contractual agreements, clear governance frameworks, and a commitment to putting patient needs first. Should we applaud ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Nicely put.
Nicely done.
In other words, I think that my vision is, of course, as a digital health leader in the intermediary and between healthcare and private, right, as a digital health assessment company first, I see a lot of challenges in the dialogues currently. I think it's really important to first plan requirements for, the procurement of digital health solution in advance. I think it's on both levels and on both sides. Going on to the management of risk, we have to think about the risks first. So let's define these risks. There are cybersecurity risks, privacy risks, ethical risks, clinical evidence risks, and of course, compliance risks. So all these risks taken into account, currently I see, especially in Quebec, a very hard market for vendors. Essentially, there is no direct line for market access like we have in Germany, and the answer to how to manage risks in digital technology was already answered by Germany, in my opinion. So what we just heard is a fast-track model in which you are considerate of all the key aspects and you have a governance that is able to make sure that the products become reimbursed, but still keep that impartiality of having these assessments, because what wasn't explained by Cornelius is that you need to go through the process, and to become a DIGA, you need to comply to cybersecurity, privacy, ethical, and usability requirements. All that to put into account, I think that for private and public partnerships to work, I think that private needs to be very, very cautious and understanding of the risks of their technologies, and also put a governance for their own projects as well that's very carefully planned. For example, we've mentioned that I'm part of a consortium and I'm a consultant in a project that wants to optimize the care pathways of patients in cardiology. And one thing I really enjoyed about that product is that the sponsors really were cautious and understanding of the fact that the health system, especially in Quebec, doesn't have a culture for partnerships with private. So they've done a separate entity for governance for that project in order for it to design the main orientations of the project. This brings a proper governance, in my opinion, to be able to scale and implement these projects. So a concrete example was that instead of saying, I want to innovate and I want to partner with the Quebec health system, how can I do that, right? How can I make sure that I can have a relationship with the Quebec health system? Well, they said, I'm going to look at the patient challenges for my thematic that I want in cardiology, and I'm going to go to the source of the patient challenges. And who's going to tell me how to bring the solutions? The patient foundations, the physicians, so the one at the level of care to be able to design the proper solutions. And I think that has really worked. So this comes back to transparency and making sure that we listen and put the patient at the center of the conversation first, and then build up and scale the partnerships after that based on that patient consideration first.
Yeah, I really like that, and I think that links very nicely with the question that I have for Ron on terms of that transparency and accountability in these public-private partnerships, with, of course, the patient interest at the front. So, can you tell us more about that from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I can. That's a great question. I'll probably give you a bit of background on how we sort of started partnering with the private sector. And we did it. It happened in a not a very deliberate way when we started. We got an invitation to a Hacking Health Weekend event back in 2017 from the university. The dean of the med school reached out and said, we wanted to invite you to Hacking Health. And of course, I said yes, and I didn't really know at the time what it was. So I went to my boss, the CEO. I said, Dave, boy, we got an invitation to Hacking Health. Do you want to go? And he asked me what it was. And I didn't know what it was. But I said, Dave, I don't know what it is, but we should go because the university is putting it off. So anyway, we went that weekend, and it was beautiful. We had the private sector. We had the public sector. We had medical experts, content experts. We had technical people. So I was a part of a team that weekend, actually. We had a huge issue. Newfoundland, if anyone knows a little bit about Newfoundland, all our population is in one area, basically on the Avalon Peninsula. 500,000 people, 300,000 people on the Avalon Peninsula, small geography. The rest of the population is spread out all over God's country. And there's a lot of God's country. It's a pretty big landmass. So we found that access to the cath lab, the closer you were to the cath lab, you had a better outcome, right? So we wanted to get at that problem. So that weekend, I was part of the team with our clinical chief of cardiology, and we pitched that solution to the private sector. We pitched the issue to the private sector. We had this problem. So that weekend, we created the minimal viable product, the technology to be able to level set that access. So we saw the power, right? You know, it was a weekend. We saw the power in partnering with the private sector. Then the province changed our procurement legislation. So they came along and they changed the procurement legislation to allow us to partner with the private sector to do innovative alternative procurement methods. So we jumped on that immediately. So we went to 2017, now we're at 2018. We went out and we went to the market and we asked for partners to innovate or to solve challenges in the health system. We had 27 proponents respond. It was a very simple statement. We picked 5. So we started right away. So, you know, the problems in the system are so great now, right? We just couldn't solve them, right? So one of the first ones that came out of the gates was we had this population of diabetics down in a rural area of Newfoundland. And we did everything over a number of years to manage them and couldn't manage them, right? And their condition was getting worse. So this problem came from the front line. So we had onboarded 5 new partners, innovation partners, through a procurement exercise, a public procurement exercise that became vendors of record. We took our frontline folks, and they came in and pitched this issue to our private partners. Medtronic happened to be one of those partners, and they picked up on that. So we designed it was very innovative. A lot of people looked at us with 100 heads because now we're actually not working with the private sector as a vendor. We're bringing the private sector in as a partner. Yeah. So we ripped down their cost, okay? So basically to manage this cohort of patients, we ripped down the cost. So what would it cost for them to do it? So they told us what it was, and we did that collaboratively. And then we said, listen, if you could actually do something with this cohort of patients, we'll give you a bonus if you can do something. But you only get the bonus if you achieve the outcomes. So it was 240 patients. We actually shifted their hemoglobin A1C. Their patient satisfaction went through the roof. Their BMI improved. So we shifted the health of the population and partnering with the private sector. Right? Now we're actually taking that model and we're actually going to roll that out across the province. Now, this is a big shift, a huge shift. We're working with them in a different way. So what did? We onboarded 5 more. So now we have 10 partners. We started with 5, we went to 10. That was a good group. Now we have 11. And we work with them at least twice a year where the front line pitches challenges from the system where we co-design solutions. And then at least once a year, we allow the private sector to come to us and pitch concepts to us. Now, how do we protect ourselves, right? So now we're doing this. How do we ensure transparency? How do we protect ourselves? Because, you know, I said this to you last night. The wall for IT companies, working with IT companies, is here. The wall for medtech is here. And the wall for pharmaceutical is up here. So how do you protect yourself in this environment, right? So the first thing we did, we realized we don't know a lot about working with the private sector, right? We didn't. So we went out and we found people who did. So we went and created a Health Innovation Business Advisory Committee. So we got people from the US and Canada that advise us on all kinds of topics like intellectual property, They advise us on royalties. They advise us on accountability and transparency. So then we said, listen, we need to get a governance structure. So all our work with the private sector is governed by a set of executives within our organization. We also report any activity on our public-private partnerships to our board. We do that quarterly. All financial activity is reported to the board. Now, we put some structure in place. What do we have to do? We chased it with policy, right? So we created a value-based procurement strategy, right? We launched that strategy in 2019. So that sort of guides us how to work with the private sector to protect us from an accountability and transparency perspective. The beauty of working with the private sector in a value-based way is you have to prove the value, right, to action payment, because we're into these vested risk sort of contracts. But by having to prove the value, we have huge data models, right? Yeah. Because we can't action payment until you achieve the outcome. These data models, that's our transparency, right? Because we don't action the outcome or payment until we achieve. So I do think that it's been an interesting journey in partnering with the private sector. It can be done. You had to put policy and structure around it, but it can be done, and it can be very effective. And I know the challenges are so great now. We have to.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really like this example because at the end of the day, what you measure, it's patients' outcomes. And you incentivize the private partnership with that, which I think it's the right thing to do. I also feel if you look at other countries like UK, an example, they incentivize physicians to reach certain targets, and they get bonuses on that. So it's a system that works in the favor of the patient. So thank you for sharing that. And building on that, I guess, Darcia, the next question is, you just announced a new public-private philanthropic partnership, right, for focusing on healthcare system innovation in the area of planetary health and indigenous health. How will this partnership address this broad healthcare challenge that we're talking about?
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. It's so great to have such a vibrant and interesting panel to be a part of. So thank you for having me. We're really excited about our partnership announcement with Boehringer Ingelheim Canada, as well as our Vancouver General Hospital and UBC Hospital Foundation, who's also part of the partnership, and Vancouver Coastal Health. And when I really look at the title today, Value Through Innovative Collaboration Models, I think that's one of the most exciting things for us, is really being together in collaboration with a partner that has the same shared open communication, transparency, the same mindset that we have at Vancouver Coastal Health and the same values. And I think one of the things missing in that algorithm that you shared there, Michael, is trust. Because I think if you're going into a partnership where you don't know what you're going to design together, but you know what you're trying to make better, you have to have trust. And it takes time to build that trust, to really create those collaborative models. So we were really lucky to have a smaller engagement with BI a couple of years ago when we were doing some work in our emergency department at Vancouver General Hospital, and really remembering for us as an organization that we're not just trying to bring in funding, we're not necessarily bringing in technology, we're bringing in thought partners and collaborators and expertise that we don't have, and an extension to a network of other industry partners and organizations that can help us solve some of these complex problems as well. So when BI brought some of that together into the work we were doing around, at that time it was a care gap analysis, it really showed that the gap that we thought we were solving was quite small and maybe not going to have the impact that we really thought it would. And so at the time, I would say that felt like for our organization, it felt like a bit of a failure, because intuitively, everyone thought we were doing the right thing for this population in the ED. And I think that's where we had the opportunity to prove out really how aligned we are from a values perspective, and so that we didn't need to put up as much protection to point blame if something goes wrong. And so I think throughout that process, it really set us up for success in entering into this new collaborative partnership for innovation that is really in territory I've never seen before from a collaborative model perspective. We at Vancouver Coastal Health have 4 foundational pillars that we are really embedding in everything we do across our strategic priorities. Those are Indigenous cultural safety, equity, diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, and planetary health. When we were in further discussions with BI, Indigenous cultural safety and planetary health were also at the top of their shared priorities as an organization. So we thought those combined with chronic disease were 3 areas that we both cared so much about improving across the healthcare system. Now, planetary health is language that we use very intentionally at Vancouver Coastal because it recognizes the symbiotic relationship between human health and the health of the planet, and that they're completely interdependent and you can't have one without the other. So when we think about it from the perspective of us as a public healthcare organization, we need to think about us as an emitter as well as us as a care provider. So every time a patient presents to us, we have a choice in how we deliver care, thinking about the highest quality care for that patient, but recognizing how we deliver that care and the emissions associated with how we deliver that care actually affect our entire patient population to come. And so we have to be very responsible and mindful of that symbiotic relationship. So this is giving us an amazing opportunity because we have experts in our organization who've started to prove out some of these, what we call high quality, low carbon opportunities in shifting clinical practice with both of this in mind. Bringing together the Boehringer Ingelheim partnership together with us is now allowing us to explore how we can put in a process in place to scale and spread some of this work across the organization. And so it's very exciting for us. Also, we have a very wonderful and expanded Indigenous health team at Vancouver Coastal Health, so that's another key priority, and really looking at what can we do at the intersection of chronic disease, Indigenous health, and really start to focus on health inequities that we know we have in terms of access to care as well as providing culturally safe care, so great opportunities there. And the last thing I mentioned, because I could go on forever, is the stakeholder engagement models. I think a lot of also what we're learning together in our partnership is that because there's no clear answers, this isn't the situation where you have the business requirement, you put it out there, people bid back. Like, we're trying to figure things out together, and we need a large number of stakeholders because it touches so many parts of the system. So the process we're putting in place actually has a new kind of element that we've not had before, what we're calling a readiness roundtable, which is going to bring the diverse group of stakeholders together inside our organization, outside our organization, to kind of test out the things we want to scale and spread, talk about the barriers, talk about what people are worried about, what people are excited about, and better frame out some of those, recognizing they're as much about change management as they are about change in practice and utilization of technology. So it's an exciting partnership. It's different than anything we've done before. So really excited to be able to share today.
Thank you for sharing this. I really like two things that I think, in my mind, are absolutely critical. The angle that you brought in the beginning, saying this is not the private partner, it's not the funding partner. And this is not about the transfer of funds that will help start something. This has to be self-sustained. And that's the idea at the end of the day. No matter if we invest something initially as a private company, it has to be self-sustained because it cannot grow like that forever. And I like the alignment of the values, which I think it's probably something that people don't consider on everyday basis, but I believe there's a lot of values that are very, very common between a lot of private partners and public groups, more than probably what people think initially. So thank you for bringing this together. I still have a couple of questions, and I can go on, but I would really like to turn it over to you now, now that I guess the room is a bit warmed. If you have any questions or initial thoughts that you would like to share with us before going into additional questions from my side. Anybody who's a brave volunteer? Okay, we have somebody. We have a mic.
Hi, I'm Dr. Narang. I'm from Vancouver, family physician. I find this space very interesting. Now, when you brought up the NHS kind of model and looking at rewards-based systems for incentive-based care, I think there's opportunity there, but what is the risk to the individual provider when you look at these models of if you're not at target, and if you're not at target because of more societal reasons rather than individual clinician reasons? So, I work in a lot of marginalized patients in Vancouver. I'm not going to be able to fix their A1Cs if they can't afford food. So how do we address that in this type of model?
It's a good question. Who would like to I've told you guys going to take the questions. I'm just going to moderate.
Well, I think this is a very interesting question on value-based agreements and the way they are set up. I don't think that in Canada we have a lot of experience and expertise as much as there is in other markets. But if we look at what we see in the UK, there are some parts of the value-based agreement which consider these aspects. The financial model of value-based agreement it's feasible because of digital technology, and I'll be very anxious to talk about patient literacy and the feasibility of using digital health for these models. I'm not sure we're 100% there yet. I think we need to take into consideration the fact that we still use the fax. But all of this aside, in terms of the financial structure of these agreements, usually I'd be curious that you answer the question in terms of your business value-based agreements, but if you reach an outcome for a patient, then you're getting paid a lot of dollars to make sure that you can have a lot of patients as well that don't reach that outcome. So the models are usually created based on an analysis of the feasibility to reach the outcome. So it considered that risk in that sense.
Yeah, just to add on just to go to the diabetes one that we did with value-based, that was the payout on that one is based on the outcome, right? So it was 240 patients, and very simply, so the way the model was $1,200 per year to manage the patients and a $300 bonus. Very simple. They achieved the $300 bonus on the patients they managed effectively. On the ones they didn't, they wouldn't get the bonus. But they all got the cost. Right?
Yeah. Any other question, please?
Hello, my name is Jean-François. I'm a former political advisor and then I'm a lobbyist actually right now in a public affair firm in Quebec. My question is for you, Cornelius, about the German process and the reimbursement of digital application. So there's the evidence, of course, that justify the reimbursement. But from the public, from the government perspective, well, money is not infinite. So how do this get reimbursed with the availability of the money from the taxpayers? Can you tell us more about that?
Mm-hmm. Actually, very good question, because I talked about like the existing reimbursement pathways in Germany for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and they were linked to a process that was like highly guarded by a steward system. So there are like a ton of other corporate bodies in Germany that actually take care in a self-regulation system what accesses the market and what not. It's not part of the obligation of the federal ministry to decide if a medical device or a pharmaceutical accesses the market. And so to say the end boss, and I think it's an appropriate name for that institution, is the Federal Joint Committee, so the highest entity in Germany that judges if certain service is paid or not. And they also do price negotiations. And in order to get the fast track going, the Federal Ministry of Health, they simply decided, okay, we're gonna take away the decision if a DiGA is reimbursed from the Federal Joint Committee. We're gonna put it on the Federal Institute for Pharmaceutical and Medical Devices. So we simply take one capability off that, so to say, end boss. However, the end boss is still doing the price negotiations. So we have a two-step process. First, you get into the system that will be decided by the so-called BfArM, Federal Institute for Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices. And then you have 12 months of free price setting. So that's kind of like the incentive to get the whole thing going. And after the 12 months, you will go sit with the umbrella organizations of healthcare insurers, and then you go into price negotiations. And that's the very moment where most of the manufacturers get down to earth again, if you want to put it that way. Just to give an example, for 3 months of a prescription, that's a standard period, that's usually like around 600 euros. And all the negotiated prices that were negotiated so far, it's like only 10 DiGAs that are at that point in time. They are all in the range of 200 to 250 euros. So it's not like they went down to zero.
I think what's good to add is also to make sure that everybody's on board in that model is the clarification on that product category. We're talking about products that are used by patients on self-care basis. So it's prescribed by a physician, and the patient uses it on a self-care basis, and then there's an outcome that is achieved by the software itself. So very important to add, because I think that I see a digital health strategy in which you have a care pathway, and that some DiGAs apply to specific patient needs. And I think that's the end goal, right? That the German government wanted to make sure that there's a control over the patient experience within the health system, but access to niche, self-care oriented objectives One example would be like a cancer care patient. You need to track that patient's data in order to be able to act on that patient more proactively. But then there's a situation that patient needs to interact with a patient community because they require to interact with other patients in order to be understood. Then there's a reimbursement for that specific product, and then this product is included in the care trajectory. So I'm not sure if all is clear, but essentially I think the model and what it brings is a really democratized patient-centric approach in which the product that is being used is decided based on identified patient needs. And this is something we have found in the cardiology project, that when we started to talk to patients about digital health, we wanted to make sure to include the technology and patient literacy topic as part of the project and collaborative project development, because we wanted to make sure that we can, right on at the beginning of the project, to make sure we know these technologies will be adopted. And the patients said, hey, I don't want to use just a patient chart. I have a lot of other stuff I need to take care of. And when we regroup patients together, some of them said, I need this, some of them said, I need the other thing. So I like the German model for one key aspect, is that there's not going to be one perfect digital health technology. And if somebody in the room thinks that, please come argue with me at the end of the panel. I'll show you concrete examples of how patient centricity in digital health is hard, but is feasible and is necessary for digital health to scale.
If we can add one sentence to that, I think that's actually also one of the essential factors. So the DIGA and the whole process, since it is not built on something existing, it's something that was created from scratch. It's a sandbox for a lot of things that are simply in the system. It's a lot of ideas. For example, talking about value-based pricing. For DIGA, there will be mandatory pricing parameters to be assessed by the manufacturers, so they will be incentivized for the price negotiations. To link the topic again, they will need to collect certain parameters to show that the DIGA is not only reimbursed, prescribed, but that it is actually successful in doing what it should do. So that's another parameter why DIGA is such an interesting thing. It will be a sandbox for a lot of innovation or like mechanisms in the system.
Yeah, I see we have another question.
Yeah, Michel Cornoyer from Leomed. Basically, I'm trying to get my head around what is actually a good model, private and public sector. I listened to all four of you, and my question to you is, what is needed to have a successful partnership between the two, between one team? I won't go all through the different things that you guys talked about, but if we get down to the private and the public, and you design some kind of new technology together, is it to be successful and to have a good partnership, is it a must to have also a share of who owns that technology thereafter? Who has the right of that technology? Once you've decided that we're going in that direction, that's what we're building, I would think, but no, I won't say that. I will let you say it. That's my question.
I could take a crack at that one, because we've experienced this. So we've been fortunate enough to have challenges in the system that have been presented to our innovation partners that have been resulted in co-design intellectual property. And we've had intellectual property now that's been designed in Newfoundland and sold to the world, right? So intellectual property that actually has good value. So what our strategy, what we did, and I'm not saying this is the right way or the wrong way, because we're a public sector entity, and often I call us a boat anchor, we can be a very effective partner in a lot of ways, but we're not a very effective partner if we own a part of the intellectual property. We will strangle you with trying to manage it and monetize and commercialize it. So we've exchanged the ownership of intellectual property for royalties. Okay, so and we work this in different ways. We have lots of special partnerships with companies like BD. We have very special partnerships, and in those partnerships, BD is coming to the table they're coming to the table with a lot of capital, right? So we don't need to offer much in that regard. In startups come to the table, they're not coming with much. So we tend to take ownership, right? And it's a good strategy because we have royalty checks coming in now. I mean, obviously they're small, they're not huge, but one could imagine a day that if we have enough of these and enough of it starts to, it's like an iceberg, 9/10 of it is under the water. It could eventually start to surface. We're not under any illusion that we'll be, in Newfoundland and we're going to create a Silicon Valley or anything, but royalty checks are coming. And we know that if we continue to do this, more royalty checks will come. What makes a good partnership? I tell you what makes a good partnership is trust. And that's all there's to it. There's nothing more. You have to trust your partner. If you trust your partner, firstly, we have 11 private partners, formal partnerships. I want them to be successful, first thing. I want them to make a profit. Okay? Now, this is bad words coming out of a public servant here, right? I'm but we have to. If they don't make a profit, the relationship is not successful, right? So, the public sector got to change its mindset. If you want to partner with the private sector, we have to change our mindsets, right? First thing, the private sector got to be profitable. They have to make a profit. You have to trust them. You have to open up. With trust, it means you have to bear all. They have to bear all, and you have to bear all. It's a big shift for the private sector, but it can be done. It's a big shift for the public sector, too. It's not only, the public sector don't need to shift here only. The private sector has to shift, because you're not ready either. You're not totally ready to come in and partner in this way, so you have to shift. Yeah. Everybody has to shift. Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. Any other questions for now? Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yes, Guillaume Couture, Director of Innovation at Team Nutrition. Thank you for sharing the German standard right now for admission of different technologies. In Germany, there are about 70 million people. I just learned that today. In Canada, we're very spread out. There are a lot of different jurisdictions, regulations in different provinces. As a tech startup, how would you recommend someone get in touch, understand how it works, and start kind of building a process to see if there's actually a fit in any way?
I need to correct myself. There are 82 million in Germany, yes, but 70 million are in the insurance that is statutory health insured, and then 10 million that are in private insurances. So German healthcare sector is probably as complex as the Canadian one, as I learned yesterday evening. So you have probably 13 provinces and territories. We have 16 states. It's pretty much the same mess, or same tasks to comply with. Actually, it's kind of nice. So there's been a social code book in Germany. There's been some ordinances on DiGA, but there's also the so-called DiGA guide. So somebody actually was diligent and wrote 150 pages how to tackle the DiGA fast track on 150 pages. So it gives kind of a good introduction on how to get into the market, what data security requirements you need to comply with, what information security, what's the interoperability task about. So definitely that will be the formal way of getting in touch with it. Otherwise, yeah, happy to connect. There will be another option. Just get in touch with the local authorities, with the Federal Institute, or search for a partner in Germany.
And maybe one piece of advice, it depends on if your technology is, in what category you sit. Are you a technology that's standalone in the hands of the patients used on their phone? Or are you a technology that is a software in the phone but also with a device? Or are you a technology that's in the phone but also in the provider's hand with a dashboard? This will change things, change the requirements, change the level of risks, change your strategies. So you need to align your requirements with your what you actually provide in terms of value.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any institutions that we should know of in Canada, per se, for communications?
Sure. You can come see me.
Okay.
Maybe I can build a question on that one. From your experience, the two of you, what are the sort of the key elements of an adoption of a digital health tool from a patient and healthcare provider perspective? What makes it successful? And I think all of us who work in the industry, we develop all these tools as well. And sometimes we're surprised, people are not coming to our website or to our app is not used as much as. So what are sort of the key factor of success maybe for adoption for patients and healthcare providers from your perspective?
It's really about starting at the patient. I can't stress that enough. Michael, you mentioned it earlier. You really need to find out what's the pain of the patient, what do they suffer from, and then what can a digital technology, like how can the digital technology actually help them to get more healthy, has less pain, get more mobile, whatever. And really starting at the patient, that should determine which technology you use. For example, is the problem adherence to a certain therapy? Then the DTX should certainly focus on push notifications, make sure they always understand, right? A dementia patient needs a different app than somebody who has back pain and simply doesn't do the exercises at home. So it's really understanding the patient need, designing an app that is actually used and supports the patient, because sometimes, and it's tough to say that for me, sometimes the DIGAs are not rocket science in the core sense, but they are they activate the patient's role or the patient's resources in the whole treatment regimen, because they act on the point of care. So they really support the patient and they enable to use this resource. Because in Germany, people go to the doctor, they expect to get healthy from going to the doctor.
Like the same in Canada.
Yeah, and it simply magically doesn't happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
I like the answer because it comes back to going to the source, right? I think that we're transitioning from, I'm going to do full story. So like in 1995, we started with informatics, right? We were doing databases of things and getting data in databases. This was like fancy stuff, internet. Then we moved on to the technology information, so IT. And essentially the health systems, they said to their regional health authorities, please tell me what are the problems that I can help you solve. And the usual problem was, I want my physicians to do more patient charting to get more data, because we've built these fancy databases, so we need a front end, we need something I can interact in to put the data in. So we started to build EMR systems. In today's world, we see that the digital health currently is seeing low traction and adoption because of one thing. It's because all the systems we've designed in the past 15 years are designed based on the healthcare needs, not the patient needs. And what that brings in terms of a challenge is that we're just replicating the administrative tasks that physicians or pharmacists, I'm a pharmacist from background, do, and then it just brings more burden into the health system. Essentially, instead of faxing a paper, I'm doing an electronic prescription. Fine, good, but where's the value? So in today's world, we need to talk about digital transformation, and it comes down to going to the source of the patient needs. Again, in the heart project that is done with the Heart and Stroke in Novartis, first things first. Okay, we want to make sure that we need to understand the patient challenges. Let's go to the source and talk to physicians about the care trajectory and where there are care gaps, and start with these care gaps. And sometimes we see that there's no need for a fancy digital health technology. In the project, we've realized that patients told us that after they go out and live a cardiovascular event, they go to see their pharmacist. And they said, I want my pharmacist to be able to tell me if the drugs are the right drugs that were treated. And I want to please tell me, how can I manage myself awaiting my physician's appointment? Because the healthcare system doesn't have me see my physician in the next week after a cardiac arrest, which is a huge care gap. We know the outcomes in the 3 months after a cardiac arrest are tied to the ability of the patients to self-manage and to try to do exercises and to eat better. The first 3 months after a cardiac arrest are essential, and if patients have better behaviors, they're going to reduce their mortality rates. But patients see their physicians 3 months after a cardiac arrest. So what do we offer in the 3 months? So we realized, as part of the care pathway, that we could have the pharmacist just simply do a simple task for them, which is assessing the drug profile, knowing if it's the right drug, right therapeutic after the event, and making sure that they recommend self-care and self-management as part of pharmacy follow-up. Nothing fancy in terms of tech. It just required adding a pop-up in their pharmacy management system to tell them, hey, that that patient might benefit from another drug or self-care, just to pop up. And this, is what we see as bringing a lot of value. So I think we need to go down to the source of the patient needs when we identify what is a proper digital technology for better adoption, because fancy tech is complex, and I don't think that as a society we have yet the digital literacy to be able to interact with fancy tech. We need to keep it simple, stupid.
Thank you. Before turning over to the group as well, maybe one question, because this really triggered the conversation of integrating the voice of the patient and healthcare provider into designing the new healthcare systems, right? So Quebec, it's in the process, right, to do this. So Ron, maybe a question for you. What's the role of the industry to bring this voice of the patients and healthcare provider when you design a new healthcare system? Because I think, unfortunately, sometimes the design of those big, massive initiatives might lost the voice of the patient or the healthcare provider.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I actually, for the past 10 months, I've been the project manager for creating the new provincial health system in Newfoundland, and we went live on April 1st. So we actually dissolved all the legacy organizations and went to a new organization. It's actually an interesting project. You don't get to do many of those in your career, when something like that would happen. So what we did, it was important. A lot of times, organizational design, patients don't understand that, right? It's not their concern. You know what I mean? They're there to get care, and they don't really care too much how, who's the boss and where people sit. So what we did a very big engagement exercise. We engaged our staff. Of course, we have about 21,000 staff in our provincial health system. We engage thousands of those throughout the process. And we also engage patients. So we have a very robust patient and family advisory committee structure in the province. So we brought them along all the way along. And we also engage, believe it or not, we used our private partners to help us design the new system. They were involved. Our private partners also helped us with different pieces of this because we didn't have the capacity. We didn't have the capacity to design. Well, basically, we didn't have the capacity to fix the plane while we were flying it because we still have a health system that had to still go on while we were designing a new one. I do think that, the role of patients in everything we do, including, designing new systems or partnering with the private sector, we need the voice, right? We need the voice because it gives us an interesting perspective, but it has to be a meaningful voice. So what we've done with all our private-public sector partnerships, we have patients at the table. So patients are involved in all these projects, and they, in a meaningful way, and they give us advice. And sometimes we discount their role. They do understand these concepts when we educate them, right? Again, if you're going to bring these people in and you're going to make them a part of your system, you have to educate them on what the system is all about. So if you educate people and you bring them along, they can be very meaningful partners. The health system, as it is now, is in a bad place, right? I think everyone would say that the health system is likely now. We've never seen the challenges that we're facing ever. And I've had 30 years working on. I've never seen the challenges from a health human resource perspective. So I think we need all hands on deck: patients, providers, the private sector. We need all hands on deck to solve the challenges going forward.
Thank you.
I think I'm really impressed to see that you're starting to do that now, because I think that is an area where we are still, I'd say, quite siloed in how we partner, where we have extensive kind of collaboration integration with patient and family networks, with the services we provide as a health organization. And then separately, many of our physicians and specialists are working with all sorts of industry partners where they're seeing opportunities for something different that they could design to be able to support their patients, whether it's prior or post an interaction with the health authority. But it would be rare now, I would say, so far, to get to that next stage where we're actually collaborating all together with our patients that will be using the technology. We have a lot of patient advocates and involvement, people who are representing patients in general or a particular broad illness in general. But when you're really thinking about how do we design technology for self-service to keep people healthier, keep people at home in their community and healthier, there would be huge value in having the health authorities the medical staff and specialists and the patients kind of in that co-design, given the interaction with our system and out. And that's somewhere where there's still so much more opportunity for us to start to look at doing that. And I think to the earlier question, a lot of it starts to come into IP and who owns IP, and anytime we start to get into that, it's just like a wall that goes up. But I totally agree with you. I mean, we've never, ever been in this type of a situation where we look at, I mean, us in BC, our extreme climate events of 2021 caused all sorts of new and different ways that we've had to start doing things. When you look at the healthcare shortage of staff and medical staff across the board, when you look at the pandemics that we've had, it's just been so many things that there's nowhere even close around that demand-supply ratio where people are now really looking to partner in new and different ways. Everybody's looking for help. Everyone's looking at it from a more systematic perspective. There's no longer kind of protection of resources, of expertise, of turf. So I think it's really starting to create a landscape for a lot more of this type of collaboration going forward.
That's a good good thing to hear, I guess. Questions from the audience on this, or anything that you've heard? Quiet. Okay. I can maybe ask Darcy another question then. You've mentioned, and when you were talking about your partnership and everything that you've done, there seems to me that there's a culture of innovation that's been developed in your group. And how do you do that? Maybe you can tell the group about that, and how do you create that environment that allows not only the private sector, which maybe they're a bit more advanced in that area, but also healthcare providers to come with the innovation forward?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, because I feel like we're always on the hot seat as the public sector is the ones that are difficult to innovate with. So it's a great question, and I really think we can't underestimate culture as really really key to our success in terms of our ability to innovate. So we're doing several different things to try and better ready ourselves as a public sector healthcare organization to be able to innovate at small and at big levels. So I think part of what we're doing is really kind of engaging our whole organization and looking at innovation as a spectrum, right? We're not just focused on the big disruptive tech innovations, but looking at it as an overall spectrum allows us to do kind of three things at once. I think when we're thinking about some of those smaller scale innovations, that's where we actually start to build the culture from a mindset perspective. Like, how do we start to have everyone in our health authority, we've got 29,000 staff and medical staff, challenging the status quo all the time, welcoming diverse perspectives and experiences and points of view and expertise, looking at different ways to solve problems. If we have people start to do that every day, I think a lot of people are ready to throw that out because they're thinking, oh, the impact is small, the impact is small, the impact is small, but that's how we build a movement and a momentum and ingrained in our culture. So it's not going to be the ways where we're going to have big impact in the next 2 years, but it's going to be the way that we start to build a culture broadly across the organization. And one of the things we're starting to do is even run innovation challenges across the organization. This is an online crowdsourcing platform where people have full transparency and ability to collaborate on initiatives around. So you kind of have that piece. And then, of course, we get criticized because we're really excited about innovations in our health authority that someone else has done 20 years ago. And most other industries across the world have been doing for a long time. And so people get really upset when you don't call that innovative because it's brand new for us. It's a whole different way of working. It's either a new technology or automation or workflow, and people are like, hello, everyone else did that 25 years ago. So we're really kind of using the term around modernization for that piece of work, because for us, we're modernizing how we deliver care and how we support our patient population in Vancouver Coastal Health. That does not necessarily mean it's brand new. It does not mean it's groundbreaking, but it's new and different for us, and we still have to make really clear choices of how to prioritize that. And that's much more in the space around kind of your typical automation and large business systems type of implementations. And then it's really in these new spaces that is in that more disruptive, collaborative, how do we actually now really recognize that we need to augment the skills, the expertise that we have in the organization to start to look at things differently. So when we think of that culture, it's no one piece of that. It's not just these partnerships with industry and academia and research and ourselves. It's not just the small things. It's all of it together, and we've got to think about how much effort we put in each areas for how much impact to really start to shift the system over time.
Yeah, no, that's a very nice and you are right in terms of innovation. It's a build-up. I think you guys probably you're a testimony of that. I don't think what you developed overnight, popped out of nowhere. It's a stepwise approach. So getting to that mentality, it's absolutely critical for success. I'm going to turn it over one more time for the audience for maybe last questions, if there's any questions that you might want to ask, or any comments that you would like to add to the conversation. Okay. If not, I'm going to thank you very much for the participations. I really enjoyed to moderate this session. I really appreciate all the insights. I'm hoping you guys got a bit of an insight in terms of maybe not a blueprint of private-public partnership and driving innovation, but definitely what I've heard from everybody here is that there's definitely a big gap in clinical and healthcare today, and in order to solve that, this partnership it's critical. I've also heard loud and clear the trust component. We all have to trust each other. I really like that, and I think this could be applied to our work lives or even our personal lives. Trust is probably something that needs to be earned, but once it's given, I think the relationship goes to the next level. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about all the work that you guys are doing. I'm gonna maybe end up, if I have this slide, Olivier. I talked about the partnership for healthcare sustainability and resilience that we put together. And Canada has actually a chapter, and there were contributors from all the regions in Canada, including Quebec, to this chapter, and identifying the gaps of the healthcare system in Canada. It's a very interesting report that was released actually in November last year. So I encourage you guys to go and read, and you'll probably find a lot of themes that are very common in terms of the healthcare gaps that needs to be addressed today in the Canadian healthcare system. There's actually sessions that are going to happen in September in Quebec. So if you guys want to participate in those sessions, just scan the QR code, and then you're going to get more from there. So thank you again for making the time, and then for all the comments. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed the session very much. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists.
Thank you.